Today I'm going to show you how to create a simple Celtic knot border. You'll need a pencil and paper and a ruler and maybe also a pen to darken your lines and refine them. So the first thing you want to do when you begin drawing Celtic knot borders is you need to have a layout. You need to figure out where your border is going to go, how long it's going to be, how wide it's going to be, and the spacing between the intervals of the design. So the ruler is going to help us with that there. To do this border, I'm going to draw 3 parallel lines. One line for the center of my Celtic knot border, one line for the bottom edge of my border, and a third line for the top edge of my border. Now I'm keeping it simple by just using the width of the ruler for the spacing of my lines so that I get them nice and even and parallel without actually having to measure anything. But depending on how thick or wide you want your border to be, you can choose different measurements. So it just so happens that the width of this ruler is 1.25 inches. So each of these lines is 1 1/4 inch apart. So that's not terribly important because we're just laying it out very, very simply with minimal effort and minimal measuring. But I do need to measure the spaces between my intervals. So I'm gonna go with a fairly standard inch spacing. So here on the center line, I'm going to place some marks 1 inch apart. And I'm gonna put those marks right on that center line. I don't wanna make them too big. I just want them to be visible to me so that I can find them where I need to. So there we go. I was able to fit quite a few across there. Now, once you have your marks here in the middle, you need to think of them in pairs. So odds and evens. Of course, my first mark here I would think of as number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4. I don't necessarily need to number them, but if that's something that helps you conceptualize how this goes, then that's not a bad idea for you to do. Any markings you do put on here should be light though. So here's what's going to happen. I'm going to draw a curve from my number 1 dot to my next odd number, which is number 3. And it's going to jump over the number 2 dot. So if I number these, I'll put 1, 2, 3, sorry, that's not the right place. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and I got up to 10 there. So I'm going to join the odd numbers with the other odd numbers and the even numbers with the other even numbers. So this is what that looks like. The highest point for my arc is going to be right above the number 2 and back down in a nice smooth arc down to number 3. I'm going up from 3 over 4 back down to 5, and 5 is going to go to 7. 5 goes above 6 back down to 7. 7 to 9. So keeping with the theme of odd to odd and even to even, now my even numbers come in. 2 to 4. 4 to 6. And you can see this is beginning to create a bit of a pattern here. Some repetition of shape is happening. And 8 to 10. Now, these are not perfect arches, but they're good enough for our purposes. Now, at the ends, I have 2. I could go from 2 to 0 if 0 existed on here, but I'm actually going to have it go up and then end just above the number 1 and not come back down. I'm leaving that hanging for a reason. More on that later. And then number 9 is going to come up and it's going to end just above number 10. So I'm going to get rid of these numbers because I want to do the same thing but below the center line. So these are above the center line, and now I've got to fill this space with the same kind of arcs, just in reverse. So my first position to my third position, and so on and so forth. It doesn't take long to do this. And it's even easier if you have drawing tools like perhaps a compass or a circle template or some kind of drawing tool like that. But freehanding it is just fine. I'm keeping these lines very light and sketchy because these are just going to be guidelines for my design. What I'm drawing now actually isn't going to persist in my final design. There are places that might persist, but most of it will not. So having a good eraser on your pencil is a must. Even having a separate eraser wouldn't be a bad idea. So here I have the guidelines that I need. So my arch is on the top and my arch is on the bottom, and they're all interconnected, and that's what I want it to look like. So I'm ready for the next step. So my next step is going to be to simplify what I have here. I actually want to get rid of some of the guidelines that are present because I no longer need them. As a matter of fact, the straight lines that I made here and here and here are no longer necessary. So all I need to do is get rid of it. Now you can get, a plain old eraser like this. You can use the pencil eraser, or I like these erasers because they are a bit more precise. I can put this smaller eraser where I need it to go and do things that way. Pardon the noise. And then of course I can just erase this straight down the middle. A squeaky eraser. It happens. Okay, get rid of my ruler for now. I don't need to make any more straight lines right this second. Okay, almost there. So getting rid of those straight lines leaves pretty much what we need to see, which are these curved lines here. Now, once I have my area cleaned up of straight lines, so I can see there's this curvy line that waves up and down, and it even doubles back on itself and comes back around and through. What I want to do is I want to begin to thicken that line to make it appear more like a ribbon or a rope rather than just a thin line. So I'm going to add shapes on the insides of all of these areas and to the outside as well. So I'm just going to trace along the lines that I already have and create shapes like this. So I'll add a row of these all across the top, down on the bottom as well, and I want to try to keep a consistent distance from this shape to the guidelines that suggest it, to keep them all pretty much the same, nice and neat. And then of course in the middle I'm going to have this kind of elongated almond shape, almost looks like a football. Something like that. So I think a little time lapse will help me finish this. Oh, and the outside goes like this. Okay, so top and bottom for that as well. So this is what it looks like when you fill it out and draw the shapes on the interior of the guidelines. It's fairly simple. They're just the same shapes over and over again. So you have this kind of curvy triangular shape, kind of looks like a slice of pizza, and then this almond shape or squished football. And then of course there's the outline on the outside. Very simple. Once that's done, then you can get rid of the outline on the inside. Sorry, not the outline, but the guideline on the inside. So that process yields a result that looks like this in this section right here. So let me go ahead and do that, finish that up real quick. Well, this is what it looks like when you get everything erased. So you're left with kind of an interesting pattern of shapes. Now, the next part seems complex, but it really is not. As long as you think of this as 3 sets of intersections. So where my original line, straight guideline was, I would consider the top rows of intersections. The center, of course, is the center row of intersections, and then the bottom is the bottom row of intersections. So think of it as 1, 2, 3. In each row, the overlaps will happen in the same direction. So what do I mean by overlap? Well, one part is going to look like it's going over another part. So this strand is coming underneath of this strand. And if I do that same thing in each of these subsequent areas along that same row, I will get what I'm after. So I just keep on connecting those 2 lines. So I'm connecting the upper left to the lower left, and the lower left to the lower right, and the upper left to the lower right. So it goes like that. All right, so I just keep on doing that same thing. And this is where if something is a little bit off, this is your time to kind of fudge things a little bit and get things to flow. That's the word you want to think of when you're doing this particular process, is flow. You want lines to flow into one another. So if something is misaligned, this is your time to go ahead and realign it and get it to look good. So there's that whole top row all done, going in the same direction. Now, once I get to the middle row, I'm going to flip what I just did. So instead of going in this direction, I'm going to go in this direction. So I'm going to change direction. This strand is going to be on top, and this strand is going to go underneath. So I do have to do some slight modification. You'll notice how these lines are kind of curved. Well, they will become more like an X when you complete this overlap. So it will look something like that. So I just need to do this in every single one of these. So I just have to copy this right here. So that's what I'm going to do. Each one does the same exact thing, just like this. Doesn't take long to do. And remember that word flow, that's what you want to have happen here. You want this area to flow into this area and look like it's a continuous strand from top to bottom. And of course, you may need to adjust the one in the background somewhat, depending on how it looks. This looks pretty good. All right, and then the bottom is actually going to do the same thing that the top did. So if I'm going in this direction, I'm going to continue going in that direction here. So this is what that's going to look like. And the overall effect is one to where it looks like this strand is knotted or braided like this. So you can see here I'm kind of extending the way that I draw this so that I can get that area to flow into the next as seamlessly as possible. So it looks like a continuous strand. Here there's some misalignment going on, so I'm just gonna have to change a couple things. There we go. That doesn't take a lot of effort to look good. A little bit of misalignment there. And there we go. Just need to do a little bit of erasing here and there. So that is how you complete your overlaps. So the top, the middle, and the bottom have been overlapped, and the key is to remember that each row repeats itself. So this will do the same thing all the way across here, this will do the same thing all the way across here, and this will do the same thing all the way across here. Now what about these ends? So there are a couple different ways to treat this. If I was doing this as an actual border, I would either connect this to another border of the same type and create some kind of intricate corner design right here, or I could end it, create a rosette or a spiral design for the corner, and then have another border going up. There are several different ways to handle it. So if I want to end this, one possible way is just to go ahead and connect this straight across to the other side with a nice straight line. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. And that looks nice and neat, and it gives me a straight edge here. If I was to have a square rosette in the corner, that works. Another option is to incorporate this end into the design. So if I'm coming from here and coming underneath, what I could do is I could split this and have this part go up and meet this end of a strand right here, like that. And then this would go underneath and then meet this end of this strand right here, something like that. So two different end treatments, but both very simple. With this side, this section loops back on itself. That's totally fine. But with this, it incorporates the corners with another intersection right here instead of two separate lines like that. But they both look good. How does one finish something like this? What are some different design treatments and embellishments that one can do? Well, for starters, I think it's a good idea to ink it. So what I would do is I would come back with a nice pen, whether it's a felt tip or ballpoint or gel, what have you, even a Sharpie, and just outline it and come back and erase any stray pencil marks that may be in there that I don't want to see, something that's going to refine the design like that. So this is going to be the first step that I take in creating a treatment or a refinement. So let me go ahead and do a time lapse of this process. Here we have the design outlined and refined and cleaned up. So there aren't any more stray pencil marks. I may need to go back and kind of smooth a couple little areas here and there to get it to look nice and connected. But overall, it's a pretty clean design. Now, this is the simplest version, where it's just empty, ready to be colored in. You can add whatever colors you want. You can do some color shading. You do a lot of different things to this, but there are some design treatments that you could consider doing to this that are very simple. One would be to just color in these areas, just solid black, which is what I'm doing here. What this does is it creates some contrast to the design so that the actual ribbon or the knot stands out against the black background. Now this is just one way to fill this space. Nothing wrong with completely filling it up, but there are more interesting ways to do that. So you could do a very controlled crosshatch or just hatching. So this would be just hatching, where you do lines in one direction. Cross hatching would be when you cross those. So you could do something like this to fill this space. Takes a little bit less time, still looks good. You could fill it with stippling, so just little dots. I could even get the edge to be quite dark and then leave the middle a little bit lighter. I'm gonna scatter some dots in there. That looks good too. I could choose to draw little circles, almost kind of like chainmail or bumps on ray skin. It just depends on what look you're after. So those are some different fill methods. Now, what do we do with the ribbon itself? Well, we can divide it and do a double strand instead of a single strand, which looks quite nice, but is also quite simple. Or you could create a slight border within the border by doing some thin lines on the outside like this. And if you were to do that, but then also fill the space in between with some kind of design, now you could do hatch marks, which would make it look kind of like a rope, which is just fine. Or you could do circular designs, very similar to this. There's any number of different ways you could treat this, and many of them are historically accurate. I'm quite partial to the border with the circles. That looks really traditional to me. Whichever way you choose to do it, it'll look more interesting than just a plain open one. This works really well if you're going to color it and shade it. But if you want to add a little bit of extra flair, think about some of these design treatments for the ribbon and also for the background. They all look good. You can mix and match, try out different things and see how it works for you. But this is how you make a simple Celtic knot border design. Well, I hope you have success in your attempt at making one of these designs. Just keep in mind that it all starts from simple straight lines and simple curves. And remember, the key word is you want your design to flow. So follow that strand. Have fun making it. I'll catch you in the next one.